The gym was filled with the usual noise of weights clanking, people chatting, and trainers giving instructions. It was a busy afternoon, and everyone was focused on their routines. In one corner, a group of fighters practiced sparring, their movements fast and precise, while others worked on their strength and endurance. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and determination. Among the crowd was Michael, a black belt in karate. He was well known in the gym for his skill and his cocky attitude. His long, lean frame moved with ease as he shadowboxed, his powerful punches slicing through the air. He loved showing off his skills and often talked about his past victories, making sure everyone knew how great he was. His friends gathered around him, laughing and joking as he shared his latest martial arts stories. It wasn't unusual for Michael to boast, and today, he seemed to be in top form, making grand gestures with every story he told. He enjoyed the attention, especially the admiration from the other gym-goers. His friends constantly praised him, calling him the best fighter in the gym. Michael loved the title, and he wore it like a badge of honor. After all, he had earned it. With years of experience and countless victories under his belt, he felt unbeatable. No one, in his mind, could challenge him. His arrogance was his most defining feature. As Michael continued to boast, his eyes fell on a woman in the corner of the gym. She was standing by the stretching mats, moving slowly as she worked on her flexibility. Her name was Laura, and she wasn't a fighter. She didn't engage in the intense sparring sessions like Michael did, nor did she show off her skills. Laura was more reserved, keeping to herself and focusing on her own goals. To Michael, she was just another face in the crowd. But that day, something about the way she carried herself caught Michael's attention. She was calm, almost serene, as she stretched. She moved with quiet grace, her posture perfect, her movements controlled. Michael, feeling a sense of superiority, couldn't resist the opportunity to make her part of his show. He nudged his friend beside him, his grin widening as he thought of a way to spice things up. "Hey, you!" Michael called out, his voice loud enough for everyone in the gym to hear. Laura, who had been quietly focused on her stretch, turned her head slightly, surprised by the sudden attention. Michael's friends immediately stopped talking, turning their attention toward the woman in the corner. "Think you could handle a fight with someone like me?" Michael's voice was playful, but there was an underlying arrogance in his tone. He expected her to laugh it off, to be flattered by his attention. It was just a joke, in his mind, but he couldn't resist testing her. His friends chuckled, knowing that no one in the gym could possibly challenge Michael and win. For a moment, Laura simply stood there, her eyes calm as she looked at him. Michael waited for her to crack a smile, to tell him that she wasn't interested, or perhaps to tell him she couldn't fight. But Laura didn't do any of that. Instead, she met his gaze with a steady look that surprised him. "Sure," she said, her voice steady and quiet. "But I don't fight for fun. If you want to spar, we do it seriously." The room went silent. Michael's grin faltered, and his friends exchanged puzzled looks. This wasn't the reaction he was expecting. His offer was supposed to be a light-hearted challenge, but Laura had turned it into something more. It wasn't just about fun or games. She was serious. Michael's friends started to laugh, thinking she was just bluffing, but Laura stood her ground. She didn't show fear or hesitation. She simply stood there, waiting for him to respond. The silence in the gym was deafening, and all eyes were now on the two of them. Everyone waited, unsure of what would happen next. Michael, trying to save face, chuckled awkwardly. Okay, he said, his tone a little less confident than before. "I didn't think you'd be serious. But sure, we can do this." He turned to his friends, who were still watching with curious eyes. "Let's clear some space. We'll have a quick spar." The tension in the air grew thicker as the gym members made way for the impromptu match. Michael stepped to the center of the floor, stretching his arms and getting into his fighting stance. He was confident now, feeling sure that his experience and training would easily overpower Laura. After all, he had been practicing martial arts for years. What could this woman possibly know about fighting? Laura, on the other hand, remained calm and collected. She didn't rush to the center of the gym. She took a moment, composed herself, and then stepped forward slowly. She wasn't intimidated by Michael's reputation, nor by the audience that had gathered around them. To her, this wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about showing that strength came in many forms, not just the obvious ones. As she reached the center of the gym, she took a deep breath and settled into a stance of her own. It was simple, focused, and steady. There was no showboating, no extra movements. Just pure discipline. The gym was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Michael was still underestimating her. He had been in the ring with countless fighters, and none of them had been a real challenge. This was just a woman who seemed harmless, right? He cracked his knuckles and smiled, ready to end this quickly. "Let's see what you got," Michael said with a cocky grin, but inside, a tiny seed of doubt began to grow. Still, he shrugged it off. It wasn't like she was a black belt like him. He would win this easily. The gym spectators stood around the sparring area, eager to see Michael's dominance on display. They had all seen him in action before and had no doubt that he'd make quick work of Laura. But as they waited for the fight to begin, there was a strange feeling in the air. The excitement was palpable, but it was also mixed with an unexpected sense of curiosity. What was going to happen? Would this woman really be able to challenge Michael? Without another word, Michael lunged forward, throwing a series of punches in quick succession. His movements were fast, his punches strong. He was trying to show off, to make it clear from the start that he was in control. But as he threw each punch, Laura simply stepped back, easily avoiding his attacks. It was as though she was reading his movements before he even made them. The gym's atmosphere shifted. There was no laughter now. No one was sure what to expect. Michael, with all his skill, was struggling to land a blow. Laura moved with ease, her body fluid and precise, dodging every punch he threw. Michael's confidence started to wane. He tried to follow her, but she was always one step ahead, keeping her distance, her posture unbroken. It was only the beginning, but already, the gym members were beginning to realize that maybe this woman wasn't as easy a target as they had thought. Michael's confidence began to crack. He had underestimated Laura from the very beginning, thinking that her calm demeanor and lack of flashy martial arts moves meant she was easy prey. But now, as he tried to land punches that seemed to never connect, he was starting to realize how wrong he had been. Every time he moved, Laura was already one step ahead. She wasn't fast in the way he was used to, throwing rapid punches or trying to overpower him with sheer force. Instead, she was controlled, composed, and precise. She moved with purpose, her feet planted firmly on the mat, her body responding in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the fight. Michael threw a roundhouse kick, aiming for her head, but Laura ducked under it, her movements smooth as silk. The crowd around them was silent, eyes locked on the sparring session, completely captivated. This wasn't the fight they had expected. They had thought it would be quick, easy, and one-sided. But now, they were beginning to realize that Laura wasn't just another gym-goer. She was something more. Michael's breathing started to get heavier. He had always been the fastest, the most skilled in the gym, but now he found himself struggling to land a single hit. His punches, which usually landed with precision, were now missing by inches. Every time he thought he had her cornered, Laura would slip out of his grasp effortlessly. It was as if she was anticipating his every move before he even made it. Frustration bubbled up inside him. He tried to mask it with a smirk, pretending it didn't bother him. But deep down, his pride was beginning to take a hit. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. And yet, there he was swinging and missing, every punch and kick just a little off the mark. "You're not bad," he said, trying to sound confident, but the words came out more as an attempt to reassure himself than as praise. "But I'm just getting warmed up." Laura didn't respond. She just nodded slightly, her face still calm, her eyes never leaving his. It was as if she wasn't just watching him, she was reading him, understanding his rhythm and timing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Michael charged forward again, hoping to catch her off guard. He threw a series of jabs, followed by a low kick aimed at her legs. But Laura's reactions were effortless. She dodged the punches and stepped aside just in time to avoid the kick, causing Michael to stumble forward slightly. He caught himself, but the misstep made him angry. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He wasn't supposed to be losing control like this. He tried again, his movements more desperate this time, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks in quick succession. But Laura was always one step ahead, moving just out of his reach with a calmness that only fueled Michael's frustration. He wasn't just losing the fight, he was losing his confidence. The gym, once full of excitement and chatter, was now deathly quiet. The only sounds that could be heard were the thuds of Michael's footfalls on the mat and the occasional sound of him breathing heavily. Michael's friends, who had been watching with smug grins earlier, were now looking at each other with wide eyes, unsure of what was happening. They had all assumed that Michael would win easily. They had all expected him to show off, to make a quick example of Laura, but now they were starting to wonder if they had misjudged the situation. Laura's movements were so fluid and effortless, almost like a dance. She wasn't overexerting herself, she was just responding. Every dodge, every step, every shift in her body was calculated and precise. It was clear to anyone who was paying attention that she wasn't fighting with force. She was fighting with control, with strategy. And it was working. Michael paused for a brief moment, panting heavily, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to hide the fact that he was beginning to tire. It wasn't just the physical strain of the fight, it was the mental strain. He had prided himself on being the best in the gym, the strongest fighter. But Laura wasn't intimidated. She wasn't fazed by his reputation or his attacks. She was just focused, calm, and patient. Laura noticed that Michael was starting to slow down. His movements weren't as sharp as they had been at the start, and his breath was coming faster. She knew it was only a matter of time before he made a mistake. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to force anything. The fight would come to her, and when it did, she would be ready. With a sudden movement, Michael lunged forward again, trying to land a powerful punch to her midsection. But this time, Laura was ready. She sidestepped him effortlessly, her foot sweeping out in a smooth motion. Before Michael could react, she had him off balance, his body tilting forward. In one fluid motion, Laura executed a perfect trip, sending Michael crashing to the mat with a loud thud. The gym was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Michael lay on the floor, stunned, his pride wounded. Laura stood over him, her posture still calm and composed. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken for her. Michael, still on the floor, looked up at her in disbelief. How had this happened? How had she, a woman who barely seemed to be involved in the competitive side of the gym, taken him down so easily? He slowly pushed himself up, his hands shaking slightly. His face was flushed, not just from the exertion, but from the embarrassment. He had always prided himself on being the strongest, the most skilled. But Laura had just shown him that strength came in many forms. It wasn't just about speed or power, It was about precision, control, and humility. As Michael stood up, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for Laura. She had fought not with aggression, but with focus. She had made him realize something he had never considered before: martial arts wasn't just about fighting to win. It was about fighting to understand, to improve, and to respect your opponent. Michael glanced at his friends, who were now looking at him with surprise, their expressions much different than before. They were no longer laughing. They weren't mocking him. Instead, they were watching with a newfound respect for Laura. They had seen what had just happened, and they knew that this was not just about a simple fight. This was a lesson in humility and skill. Laura, without a word, stepped back, giving Michael space. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't showing off. She simply stepped back, waiting for him to continue. And for the first time, Michael realized that he didn't need to keep proving himself. Laura had already shown him what true strength was. Michael's mind raced as he slowly got back to his feet. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath came in heavy gasps. He was embarrassed. No, more than embarrassed, he was shaken. The crowd around him had gone from cheering to silent. They were watching, waiting, and Michael couldn't ignore the looks of surprise on their faces. As he stood, wiping the sweat from his forehead, he tried to regain his composure. The floor beneath him felt like it was shifting, the weight of his reputation now hanging over him like a cloud. This wasn't just about losing a match. This was about losing everything he had built in this gym: the title of the best fighter, the respect of his peers, the pride he wore like armor. And all of that had been taken away in a matter of moments. By someone he never expected. He looked at Laura. She was standing across from him, as calm as ever, her breathing steady, her face still composed. Her movements had been graceful, deliberate, and, most importantly, controlled. She hadn't used her strength against him. She had simply used his own momentum and her own skill. That was impressive, Michael muttered, his voice betraying the humility he was trying to hide. He still couldn't wrap his head around what had just happened. Here he was, a black belt, a fighter with years of experience, humbled by a woman who had only trained in quiet corners of the gym, away from the spotlight. Laura didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already said everything with her actions. The way she moved, the way she didn't rush, and the way she never showed any sign of fear or doubt. Laura had done what Michael had failed to do: she stayed calm. She stayed focused. She let the fight come to her. Michael wiped his hands on his shorts and took a deep breath, trying to push the embarrassment aside. He knew that if he didn't get his head straight, he wouldn't be able to continue. This was about more than just a fight now. This was about learning. And he hated to admit it, but he knew that there was something important here that he had missed. "All right, round 2, Michael said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He flexed his arms and nodded to Laura, expecting her to step forward and take the challenge. His pride was on the line, and he was determined to show that he wasn't going to back down. But Laura didn't immediately take the bait. She stood there, silent, waiting for him to make the next move. She wasn't mocking him, but her calm demeanor made it clear that she wasn't going to rush into anything. She was in control, and Michael could feel it. He charged forward again, his body now moving with a mix of anger and determination. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to show that he wasn't a joke, that he wasn't the fool everyone was thinking he was. But his movements were off. He was too quick, too forceful, and it was exactly what Laura had been waiting for. She stepped aside, just like before, avoiding his punch with ease. But this time, there was a slight change in the air. Michael could feel it. He wasn't just fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting to redeem himself, to show that he could win, even after everything that had happened. Laura's eyes followed him closely, and with each movement, she seemed to anticipate his next move. Michael threw another punch, this one faster, trying to catch her off guard. But Laura moved like water, flowing around him, her body reacting instinctively to his aggression. She didn't need to think about it. She had already won in her mind, not because she was better, but because she understood what was happening. Michael's foot slipped slightly as he tried to turn on his heels to follow her. That was when Laura saw her opening. With a swift movement, she stepped into his space, using his momentum against him once again. Before Michael knew it, he was on the floor again, this time harder than before. The gym was silent, the sound of his body hitting the mat echoing through the room. He lay there for a moment, stunned. The crowd was silent, and Michael's breath was ragged. He could feel the weight of his pride and his defeat crashing down on him. He looked up at Laura, who was standing over him, her posture relaxed and composed as always. She hadn't thrown a punch. She hadn't tried to overpower him. She had simply done what was necessary, never once losing her cool. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the gym on him, but this time, there was no applause, no cheers. They were all waiting for him to get up, waiting to see how he would respond. He was humiliated, but this wasn't just about losing the fight anymore. This was about something deeper. Something he had never learned before. Laura offered him a hand, but she didn't force it. She wasn't waiting for him to get up, and she wasn't trying to make a point. She was simply offering help, as if it were a normal part of the process. Michael stared at her hand for a moment. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't a pity. It was just a simple gesture of respect. And in that moment, Michael realized something he had been blind to for so long. He grabbed her hand, allowing her to help him up. As he stood, he felt the weight of the lesson settling in. Laura had shown him something important. It wasn't about how fast or how strong you were. It wasn't about how much you could show off. It was about control, patience, and humility. Michael had relied on his physical strength and his reputation for too long. He had assumed that because he was skilled, he was untouchable. But Laura had shattered that belief in just a few minutes. When he was finally standing, he couldn't look her in the eye. His pride was still hurting, but it was the kind of hurt that felt like growth. He knew that he had just experienced something that would change the way he saw martial arts and maybe even the way he saw himself. For the first time, Michael felt like he needed to listen. He needed to learn. He wasn't the best fighter in the gym anymore. In fact, he wasn't even sure if he was the best fighter in the room. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that he had learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The gym members, who had been watching in silence, began to talk among themselves. Some were nodding in understanding, others still processing what had just happened. Michael felt their eyes on him, but he wasn't worried anymore. He had been humbled, and somehow, that felt like the biggest victory of all. Laura didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had already spoken with her actions, and that was enough. Michael knew that now. He had been wrong to challenge her in the first place. But in the end, he realized it wasn't about the fight. It was about what came after. Michael stood there for a moment, still processing what had just happened. The gym, once full of chatter and laughter, had now grown quiet. All eyes were on him, and he could feel the weight of their gazes. He had always been the center of attention in this place, the one everyone admired, the one everyone expected to win. But today, everything had changed. He couldn't quite believe it. He had been beaten not just by anyone, but by Laura. She wasn't a fighter in the traditional sense. She didn't boast about her skills or show off in front of others. She was quiet, reserved, and focused. And yet, she had managed to take him down with ease, using nothing but calm precision and control. Michael ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain some of his usual confidence. His friends, who had been so eager to watch him defeat Laura, were now standing in silence, some with puzzled expressions, others with a look of newfound respect. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't making jokes about how easy this would be. Now, they were watching closely, waiting to see how Michael would respond. Laura, on the other hand, didn't seem to care about the audience. She wasn't looking for approval or validation. She wasn't looking to make a point. She had simply done what she knew needed to be done. She had handled the fight with grace and dignity, and now she was stepping back, allowing Michael to gather himself. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft, almost caring. It wasn't an insult, nor was it a challenge. It was just a simple question, and it hit Michael harder than any punch ever could. It made him realize something. Laura wasn't just a good fighter. She was someone who understood the true essence of martial arts. It wasn't about defeating your opponent for the sake of ego. It was about respect, balance, and knowing when to strike and when to step back. Michael nodded slowly, trying to regain his composure. He wasn't sure what to say. For the first time in a long time, he felt lost. It wasn't just the physical defeat that had shaken him. It was the realization that he had been blinded by his own pride for so long. He had thought that being the strongest meant being the best, but Laura had just shown him that there was so much more to martial arts than physical strength. For the first time, Michael felt small, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him realize how much he still had to learn. He looked at Laura again, really looked at her this time, and something inside him clicked. She wasn't just a simple woman. She was a master in her own right, not because of her flashy moves or powerful strikes, but because of her discipline, her patience, and her ability to stay calm in the face of pressure. I didn't expect that," Michael said, his voice low. He was embarrassed, but there was no denying the truth. Laura had done what he hadn't been able to do for years. She had taught him a lesson that he had never even considered: humility. Laura smiled gently, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle in his chest. He had always thought he had mastered martial arts, that he had reached the peak. But now, he realized that there was always more to learn. And he wanted to learn. He wanted to understand the kind of control and mastery that Laura had shown him today. He turned to his friends, who were still watching him closely, some with sympathetic expressions, others with respect. Michael had never been one to back down from a challenge, and he wasn't about to start now. But this was different. This wasn't about pride. This was about growth. "All right," Michael said, his voice more composed now. "I may have underestimated you, but I can see you know what you're doing. You've got skill. I'd like to learn from you." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. Michael had always been the one teaching, the one others looked up to. But today, he was the student. And he wasn't ashamed of that. In fact, he was relieved. For the first time in years, he felt like he had something to strive for again. He didn't need to be the best anymore. He just needed to be better than he was yesterday. Laura nodded slightly, acknowledging his words, but she didn't say anything. She simply turned and walked over to the corner of the gym, where she usually trained on her own. Michael watched her for a moment, then looked at his friends. They were still silent, unsure of what to make of the situation. Michael didn't care about their opinions anymore. He had learned something far more important today. He walked over to the area where Laura had gone and stood there for a moment, unsure of how to begin. He didn't know what she expected from him. Did she want him to prove himself? Did she want him to show that he was worthy of learning from her? He didn't know, but he was determined to find out. "I'm serious," Michael said, stepping forward. "I want to learn. I want to know how you think, how you move, How you control yourself like that? I've spent so long focusing on being fast and strong that I've missed the point. Laura finally looked at him, her expression still calm, but now there was a hint of something else. Something that could have been pride, or maybe just the satisfaction of knowing that her point had been made. She didn't respond immediately, but instead, she gestured for Michael to come closer. If you really want to learn, she said, her voice soft but firm, then stop thinking about winning. Stop thinking about being the best. Think about the process. Think about the flow of the fight, the way your body moves with the rhythm. It's not about speed or power. It's about understanding. And when you understand, that's when you'll start to improve. Michael nodded, taking in her words. He had always focused on the end result, on winning, on being the best. But now, for the first time, he understood that the true goal wasn't victory. It was mastery. And that was something he could never achieve if he kept rushing through the process. Over the next few weeks, Michael returned to the gym every day, but this time, he wasn't the same person. He wasn't the cocky fighter who expected to win every match. He was the student, ready to learn, ready to listen. And slowly, he began to change, not just as a fighter, but as a person. He trained with Laura every chance he got, asking questions, listening carefully to her advice. At first, he struggled. He was used to using his speed and strength to overwhelm his opponents. But with Laura's guidance, he learned to slow down, to focus on control, to understand the way his body moved. He learned to read his opponents, to anticipate their moves, and to stay calm under pressure. In time, Michael began to improve. Not just in his fighting, but in his mindset. He learned that true strength came from within, not from how hard you could hit or how fast you could move. It came from understanding your own body, your mind, and your opponent. And with Laura's help, he discovered a whole new level of martial arts. The days turned into weeks, and Michael's routine at the gym changed. No longer was he the brash, cocky black belt who boasted about his victories. Instead, he was a student, patient, focused, and eager to learn. The lessons he had learned from Laura hadn't just changed the way he fought, they had changed the way he saw himself and the world around him. In the beginning, it was hard. Michael had spent years building his reputation as the strongest, fastest, most skilled fighter in the gym. He was used to dominating his sparring partners, to getting compliments and praise for his quick victories. But now, everything felt different. He no longer relied on his speed or power to win. Instead, he focused on understanding. He learned to slow down, to breathe, to move with purpose. At first, his friends at the gym were unsure of this new Michael. They had known him as the guy who always had something to prove, the one who always wanted to show off. But now, he was quieter. He asked questions. He took advice. And he spent hours working on his technique, practicing the same moves over and over again, focusing on the small details. Laura watched him from the sidelines, her gaze never judgmental, but always observing. She had seen many fighters come and go, all of them thinking they could master the art of martial arts with a few flashy moves or strong punches. But Laura knew that the true test of a fighter wasn't how hard you hit. It was how well you could control yourself, how deeply you could understand the rhythm of the fight. And Michael, despite his rough start, was beginning to understand that. One day, after a particularly long training session, Michael approached Laura. He had been practicing a move for weeks, trying to get it just right, but it never seemed to click. He had been frustrated, but today felt different. There was a quiet confidence in him now, something he hadn't felt before. "Laura," he said, his voice steady, "I've been working on this move for a while now, and I think I'm close. But I need your help. I can feel something's missing, but I can't put my finger on it. Can you show me what I'm doing wrong?" Laura smiled, and for the first time, Michael saw a hint of pride in her eyes. It wasn't the pride of someone who was showing off. It was the quiet pride of someone who knew that the person standing before them had learned something important, not just about martial arts, but about themselves. She nodded. "All right. Let's take a look." They moved to the center of the gym, where Michael demonstrated the move he had been practicing. He was slower this time, more measured, focusing on each step. Laura watched carefully, her eyes trained on his every movement. When he finished, she didn't say anything at first. She stepped closer to him, her hands gently guiding his arms into position. "You're close," she said, her voice calm. "But you're rushing. You're trying to force the move, instead of letting it flow. You need to trust your body more. Let it move with the rhythm of the fight, not against it." Michael nodded, absorbing her words. He had always thought martial arts was about strength, about overpowering your opponent. But Laura had shown him time and time again that it was about control, about the flow of energy, about understanding when to act and when to wait. He took a deep breath and tried again. This time, he moved slower, more deliberately. He focused on the flow, on the connection between his body and the movement. And this time, it worked. The move came together, smoothly, without hesitation. It wasn't about being fast or strong. It was about being in tune with the moment. When he finished, he looked at Laura, who was watching him with quiet approval. He could feel the difference in his body, in the way the movement had come together. It wasn't just the move itself, it was the way he had approached it. With patience, with understanding, and with humility. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice sincere. "I've been fighting for so long, trying to be the best. But I've realized that being the best isn't about winning every fight. It's about understanding yourself, your opponent, and the art of the fight itself." Laura smiled softly. "That's the first step. You've made progress, Michael. But remember, there's always more to learn." In that moment, Michael understood. The fight wasn't over, and it never would be. Martial arts wasn't just about a single victory or defeat. It was a journey, one that required constant learning, humility, and growth. He wasn't the same fighter he had been when he first walked into the gym, and he wasn't going to stop learning now. The next time Michael sparred, it was different. He wasn't focused on winning or losing. He was focused on the process. Every movement felt more controlled, more deliberate. He wasn't forcing anything. He was allowing himself to feel the rhythm of the fight, to let it flow through him. And when the match ended, he felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the outcome. It had everything to do with how he fought, how he had learned to fight with respect, with patience, and with control. The gym began to notice the change in Michael. He was no longer the loud, cocky fighter who always had something to prove. He had become someone who listened, who learned, and who worked quietly but steadily to improve. His friends began to see him in a new light, and they started to look up to him not just for his skill, but for his humility and his dedication to the craft. Laura, too, saw the change. She hadn't expected Michael to learn so quickly, but she was proud of him. She had shown him the way, but he had taken the lessons to heart and made them his own. She didn't need to say anything more. She had already given him the tools to grow, and now it was up to him to use them. One evening, as the gym began to empty out, Michael stayed behind to practice. He was alone, but he didn't feel lonely. He was at peace with the journey he had started. The gym, once a place of competition and ego, had become a place of learning and growth. He wasn't just fighting anymore, he was discovering himself, step by step, move by move. As he practiced, he thought back to the moment when Laura had first offered him her hand after taking him down. He had been embarrassed, humbled, but now, he saw that moment as the beginning of something much bigger. He had learned that being a fighter wasn't just about how strong you were or how fast you moved. It was about understanding the fight itself, about finding balance, and about respecting not just your opponent, but the art of martial arts. And as Michael continued to train, he knew that the journey was far from over. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He was ready. Ready to learn, ready to grow, and ready to face whatever challenges came his way, not with pride or arrogance, but with understanding and humility.